Hi, everyone. Um, how are you? Uh, I am Luke Healy, and I'm here today to talk to you about my new book, out with Toronto Quarterly, published today. It's called The Con Artists. And in this live stream, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the book, about how I made it, about how I make comics in general, my history with comics. And if you're watching live, I'm going to be answering lots of questions from the chat. So if you have any questions throughout this talk, please just write them in the chat. They'll find their way to me, and I might answer them straight away, or I might answer them at the end. But just to introduce myself, my name is Luke Healy, and I'm a cartoonist and comedian. I'm originally from Ireland, but now I live in London, which is where I'm broadcasting this from. I'm here in my house in Hackney, and you can see, I'm not sure what the frame is cutting off, but you can see the beautiful bins behind me, as well as this beautiful poster image of my new book, The Con Artists, available from Toronto Quarterly. Which actually was supposed to be that print was supposed to be the same size as the book. It was supposed to fit inside, but there was an ordering error, and I got 200 giant posters. So, I won't be short on promotional imagery throughout this talk. But I just wanted to start by talking a little bit about my history with comics making. This is my fourth graphic novel, The Con Artists, and in the past I've done graphic novels that are historical nonfiction. I've done memoir. I've done some sort of blending of true stories and fact and fiction, and The Con Artists is no different. So The Con Artists is fiction. It's fictionalized, but it is actually inspired by events that happened in my own life in 2018. In fact, The Con Artist is basically an adaptation of a diary. So when I started working on the book, originally I wanted to do a nonfiction book about working in comedy in London. I moved here about 5 years ago and started performing and taking classes. And now the other side of my job, in addition to making comics, is that I teach and perform improv comedy. And I really wanted to document that process. And so I kept a diary throughout the entire thing, including some comics. So I have the actual diary right here. And mostly it's text entries, but there are also some pages that were just directly comics. So the original idea for this book was that I was just going to document this journey of starting comedy, and then I would try to get somebody to publish it later. But what ended up happening during that time is sort of a series of very unusual, dramatic events. And I decided that the best way to talk about them would be to take the most interesting parts, cut out everything else, change some stuff, and rewrite the events as fiction. And so that is what has ended up as The Con Artists. So The Con Artists, as a brief sort of primer on the book, tells the story of Frank, who is a comedian like me, and he reconnects with a childhood friend after that childhood friend is hit by a bus when they're both adults. And as Frank moves in with this friend to try to help him recover from this accident, he discovers that this friend has been living a lie, and he has basically been posting lots of falsehoods on social media. So that's why I'm here on social media, to give you the truth, the hard truth. No, of course, it is fiction, genuinely. I'm implicating no true people in this book, I promise. All of the most salacious acts are entirely of my own invention. Oh my God, this is on the internet forever. Please don't call your lawyers. Anyway, the book, I started working on it in 2018. As I said, I started keeping this diary. And it was in process for a really long time. And what I ended up doing was completely adapting it during one of the COVID lockdowns. So lots of the book is very intense and anxious, I will say. And that is because I was feeling very intense and anxious as I was making it. It's kind of a departure from my work, actually. When I started making comics, I guess I'll talk a little bit about my history with comics making to sort of lead you into when I talk about my process is when I started making comics, I was a teenager. I was very into web comics. It was that time on the internet, sort of before social media, really, when people were posting web comics on their own websites, sharing them, and I got completely hooked and started to make my own. Um, at the time as well, because I really wanted to make comics that were like the web comics I was reading, I only drew everything completely digitally. So I went from not drawing at all ever to drawing exclusively on a computer, which feels very, very backwards. But I did that for years and then decided that when I wanted this, when I wanted to start making comics more into my profession, I decided I wanted to pursue education in the area. And so I went to the Center for Cartoon Studies, which is a graduate school in Vermont. So I moved over to the United States. I know I have an American accent, but I did grow up in Ireland. I promise. You'll have to read one of my books, Americana, to understand why I talk like this. It took 300 pages for me to explain, and people have stopped asking me about it, so I guess it did sort of work. But I moved over, and when I went to the Center for Cartoon Studies, that's what I sort of discovered, this world of modern graphic novels, more comics throughout history, and especially self-publishing mini comics and zines. I started going, when I lived there, I started going to shows like SPX and Cake in Chicago, and discovered this whole other world of comics and just got completely pulled in and completely obsessed. So when I was at the Center for Cartoon Studies, then I started to use pen and paper, and I got very, very obsessed with that. I became a total traditionalist. And where I've landed now, and where I landed on for the con artists, is somewhere sort of in between. So I've gone back and forth on both. For a long time, I was really, really obsessed with portability and economics when I was thinking about making my comics, because the economics of comics is like, it's really tough to make a profit. Comics don't pay all that much. And so I felt really silly buying expensive paper and pens and ink and all this sort of stuff. So I moved completely into doing books for the majority of the first three of my books were entirely drawn just on regular printer paper with a mechanical pencil. I wanted to keep it really cheap. Oh, I have a question from Hamish Steele. Hi, Hamish. What are or were, I guess, my favorite webcomics? Well, when I was reading them back in the mid 2000s, the one that really got me into wanting to make webcomics was Dresden Kodak by Aaron Diaz. I really, really loved that comic. I thought it was so funny. But I think a lot of the other ones that were really popular at the time that I also loved were, I loved Hark a Vagrant by Kate Beaton, whose new book is really excellent, by the way. I also really loved like Rice Boy by Evan Dam. I read like tons of comics. I loved Gunner Craig Court by Tom Siddell. Like I read them really religiously, and I really, really wanted to be part of that world, I suppose, which is so quaint and funny to think of it now, that I was like really excited to try to like break into the web comics world, as though there were so many barriers to entry. But I found my main barrier to entry is that I couldn't write or draw. So, it just took 10 years, and now I'm finally in. Although the world of online comics has completely changed. So, now it's all entirely based on social media and shares. And so the kind of comics that I think are becoming popular online are like totally different than they were in the sort of Wild West pre-social media days. But for this book, I went back to doing digital drawing for the first time in like almost a decade, really, because I got really, really tired of making so many mistakes. I am not a natural drawer. I really like my drawings, but it's really, really hard. I work really hard on doing good drawings because it doesn't come naturally to me. So a few years ago, on recommendation from a friend, I got an iPad, which I will now do some product placement for. If the official Apple Instagram account is watching, please send me more because mine doesn't work that good anymore. But I started to draw everything digitally again over the COVID lockdowns because I really got tired of making so many mistakes. And on a digital drawing, you can like draw and resize and erase and do all those things really, really easily and incorporate text and stuff. So when I was working on the con artists, I went straight into it digitally, and I drew all of my pencils on the iPad, looking like this, just really, really rough. But because I still am a cold-hearted capitalist and obsessed with the economics of comics, I decided that I still wanted to have original pages to sell because I've made money from original pages in the past, and I couldn't leave that cash just on the iPad. How dare I? So what I did for this book, partially for the effect of how I wanted to look and partially so I could sell original pages, was I printed everything out. I have like a light board, and I stuck it down with a piece of paper on top, and I traced over and did the inks physically. So I do have a huge stack of like, inked quote unquote pages, although they're all drawn in pencil because pencil's easier to draw with. Sorry, I'm not trying to make the most beautiful comics in the world. I'm trying to make functional comics that are really nice to read. And if I can draw them easier, I'm going to take that little bit of a shortcut. But I drew them all in just printer paper with pencil, like I did my old books. And you can see them here, put the text in digitally afterwards. And I really like how they came out. I think they look really nice. For my next book that I'm working on, actually, I guess this is a tiny bit of a preview. I don't want to detour too much from talking about the con artists, but for my next book, I'm actually doing the entire thing digitally, which I think has been really, really fun, and it's been going really well. Maybe I'll show you a page. I will do that. Navigate to them, and it's been so fun because I've allowed myself to get like super detailed on stuff that I normally wouldn't, because I know that if I need to use a background again and again, I want to draw it again and again, I can copy and paste because I'm an absolute cheater. So for example, in this page from a book that I'm working on right now, you can see that in every single frame, he's just in the same kitchen. And so the kitchen is just copied and pasted in. And that is how I like to do it these days. Oh, I see a question of what software I use when I'm drawing on the iPad. I use a software called Procreate. It is super cheap. It's like, I don't know, 10 or 15 pence. And unlike Photoshop and lots of other digital drawing tools, you don't have to pay a subscription. So it's yours forever. It does basically everything I need, like a tiny thing or two I have to end up doing on the computer, but it makes life so easy. So if the Procreate people are watching, I don't know what products you offer, but give them to me, please. Okay, so a little bit about the process. Yeah, so this is the first book that I've gone back to. The Con Artist is the first book that I've gone back to doing anything digital with, which has been really, really nice, and it made things a lot easier. I ended up drawing this book under a pretty tight deadline, and I think that actually ended up being to the book's benefit, because the book, a big theme of the book is stress and anxiety. It talks a lot about mental health, and I think that the book looks like stressed and anxious, but in a good way. I channeled my like true emotions into it as I was working on it. I'm looking down at my notes. What else do I want to talk about? Oh yeah, so one of I'll let you in behind the curtain for a second, and D&Q gave me some prompts of stuff to talk about. And one of the things that I thought was so interesting that they asked about was about workday patterns. And if any other cartoonists are watching this and you want to give me the secret to having a productive workday, please email me, lukewhealy@gmail.com. Find it if you can find it by Googling me, because I am like a deep procrastinator. It is like a really, really big problem with how I work. And I'm trying to overcome it every day. I've listened to all the audiobooks. If you've got any tips, let me know. But right now, because I'm on deadline for my next book, I'm at the point of procrastination where I can't procrastinate any longer, or there will be very, very serious consequences. So right now, at the moment, I get up super early before there are any distractions, get up at 7 a.m. and I sit down and I draw 2 pages. And I try to not do anything else before those 2 pages are completely done. And it's been working well, fingers crossed. Although, how long can you stay on track? I remember reading a quote by Jerry Seinfeld where he talked about writing jokes every day and not missing any days. And that was like his big key strategy. And you know what? If it's good enough for Jerry, it's good enough for me. Although Jerry Seinfeld, I believe, is canceled now, like all comedians. And I don't mean to say that flippantly. I think he did some bad stuff. Boo, boo, Jerry. But yeah, work shape patterns. So as I said, I work and live in Hackney in London, and I'm very lucky to be surrounded by like lots of parks and lots of cafes and stuff. So I also often work outside my home. I have a nice setup in the home that I'm lucky enough to live in, that I can get a lot of work done here. But occasionally, my brain short circuits just like everybody's does, and I must leave this room, especially after 2 years of lockdowns. So years ago, when I was still drawing in paper and pencil, a big part of the reason that I worked on these cheap materials is I wanted them to be very portable. I wanted them to be me to be able to take them out and to go out for a few hours and come back with a lot of work done. And now that I'm drawing everything on the iPad, that is still applicable. I'm still able to do that. And I really, really like doing it, because why work at home when I can pay, £4 for a coffee to work in a cafe? And most often I just go to a cafe for an hour. And then as soon as I'm ready to like really get into my work, I just leave and come home and do it here anyway. So when I was working on this book, I tried to refer back to a lot of other comics that I liked. I try to do that at the start of every book. It's a big part of my process. I guess I should talk about the writing of the books a little bit as well. So I write and draw all of my books simultaneously. So that is how I talked about how I do the drawing, but when I want to create the story for the books, I find it too hard to write a script. I can't do that. That's not really something that I've ever been able to do. I don't have the concentration level for it. And I like to visualize what's happening as I write. And so I do a very loose outline of the structure of the book, just in text, very, very loose. I would say probably like, I don't know, 30 or 40 sentences, like a few paragraphs. And then in notebooks, I have one here, I will draw very, very loose, scrappy thumbnails. You probably can't see it very well, but they are like less than stick figures. Truly, nobody else on the entire earth could look at these and understand at all what they are supposed to be. But for me, that's more than enough. I try not to get too fussy about process. I know I'm talking about it a lot, but for me, what matters is the book. The end book is the product. The book is the medium. I used to do a talk about that, and I think that it doesn't matter how you get there, but when you get there, that is the only thing that counts. So I try not to get too precious about all of this stuff. Like part of the reason that I do extremely loose thumbnails like this is that I can cross them out, I can tear out pages, I can just redo stuff, and it's not a big deal. Because as anyone who makes comics knows, editing comics is a huge pain in the ass once any of the art is done. And so I really like to do everything in this extremely rough and ready state, so that I can make all of these changes without having to lose hours and hours of work. And also, I'm too much of like a lazy, precious diva to change anything once it's been like set in stone like that. And so I just do everything I can to avoid that. So I write and draw everything at the same time as I go through. But another thing that I do before I even start writing comics is I know the themes that I want to cover, or I know the story that I want to tell, usually because it's been something that's been building. This book, as I said, is inspired by diary entries. But something that I like to do is I will collect other books that I feel like are tackling similar themes or working in a similar mode to the book that I'm trying to do. And I make like a collection of scans from those books, like a collage of images and pages that I like, so I can refer back to it as I work. So for my first book, How to Survive in the North, which was about Arctic survivalists, I had like a lot of Tintin. It was turn of the century, so I had like Little Orphan Annie, lots of stuff like that. And for the con artists, because I wanted it to have this like confessional diary vibe, I made a little collection of some of the books. I'm going to grab them here. So the first one that I'm actually really obsessed with this book. I think it's like one of my favorite books of all time. It's Today is the Last Day of the Rest of Your Life by Uli Lust. And it, for anyone who hasn't read it, it tells the story. It's a true story. It tells the story of Uli as she hitchhikes from Germany to Italy in the 80s, and it all goes horribly wrong. It's like a disaster. But what I loved about this book is it covers really dark themes, and it is very confessional, and extremely revealing and vulnerable. But the entire time, Uli has this like really wry sense of humor about it, and that is a similar thing to the con artists, where it does cover these like kind of dark themes. Like the book covers a lot of stuff about mental health, mental illness, toxic relationships, that sort of thing. And so I wanted to be able to keep it light, even though I was talking about those things, because it is a book about comedians. And because I am a comedian, I like to make jokes all the time. And so working on how to incorporate these like harsh realities with a sort of lighter sensibility, or like a wry sense of humor, or like a sort of remove, I guess, an emotional remove, was something that I really looked to Today Is the Last Day of the Rest of Your Life for, as I worked on this book. Another book that I looked at was Everything is Flammable by Gabrielle Bell, which is a book that I love. It tells the story of Gabrielle. It sort of tells about the year after Gabrielle's mother's house burns down in a fire, and it's a diary. It's true, or it's maybe not a diary, but it is a memoir. And so it sort of catalogs this time afterwards when Gabrielle is like crossing the country to help out her mother, sort of rebuild her life. And again, it does cover these like really dark things, but it has a sort of lightness, or like a sort of yeah, I guess in a similar way, it has like, this book particularly has like a glib sort of deadpan quality that I really loved and wanted to capture. Even though it's dealing with like high emotions and like loss and danger, that kind of thing. I really like the sort of attitude that Gabrielle approaches it with. I got another question from Hamish. Hi. Do you like to listen or watch anything while you work? I do. It depends what stage of the work I'm in. When I'm writing, I cannot listen to anything at all. Maybe some music, maybe, but usually I have to be in quiet. But then when I'm drawing, and especially when I'm doing coloring or any kind of digital work or cleanup, that kind of thing, I put on Gilmore Girls. It has seen me through 3 graphic novels now, and it's all on Netflix, so I can just leave it playing. And it really has the kind of, it's sort of like a radio play, like you don't often need to look at the screen. So I just listen to that. I also listen to a lot of podcasts. I also have a podcast about Gordon Ramsay called Waking Kitchen Nightmares, which I promise is not as insane as it sounds. Okay, another question. Janine Lee asks, the title of the Uli Lust book, I'll show you. It's called Today Is the Last Day of the Rest of Your Life. It is such a good book. It's really good. Speaking of other good books, so the book also, because of The Con Artist is explicitly a comedy, I wanted to look at some of the graphic novels that over the years I have really, really found like laugh out loud funny. And I'm a tough audience. I will admit to that. I like go to stand-up nights all the time and just sit there very silently, which is extremely rude of me, but it's hard to force a laugh. And so a few of the ones that sprung to mind that I just remember finding like hilarious, that I looked over this was Snackies by Nick Sumida, which I think this is such a funny book. It really is like, it's not doing the same thing as The Con Artists at all, because it's all about expressing like extreme swings in emotion, but they are just like absolutely hilarious. Oh, I'm seeing that there's lots of fellow Gilmore Girls fans in the chat. Love it. Love them Gilmore Girls. And fan theory, Gilmore Girls also refers to Emily. Whoa. Ever think about that? There's 3 Gilmore Girls in the show. Whoa. Okay. I just can't become a Gilmore Girls fan event, because I'll go on about it. One of the other books that I looked to when I was thinking about like what are some really, really funny comics, is another Drawn and Quarterly book actually. It's My Dumb Dirty Eyes by Lisa Hannawalt. Um, Lisa Hannawalt, I think, is everybody knows that Lisa Hannawalt is a genius. I think that is really appropriate because they should. But Lisa Hannawalt does something that I think that lots of other cartoonists that make funny books don't do, which is that in addition to the sentiment and the words in her books being funny, she also draws funny. Like her drawings are hilarious. I don't know how you draw a face that is that funny, but she manages it. And I thought about this book a lot while I was working on the con artists. And the last one I wanted to mention is this, Hyperbole and a Half by Ali Brush, which is a book that is a collection of blog posts that Ali Brush made. I think is like such an influential book, really. But a big thing about this book is that it talks a lot about mental health difficulties, and it does them in a way that it's so funny until it's so devastating. And that kind of contrast, that like pathos, is really I don't know. I think it's really, really powerful. I think sorry, I'm seeing more questions. I think the funny parts make the sad parts funnier. No, the funny parts make the sad parts sadder, and the sad parts make the funny parts funnier. That contrast is really amazing, and I think that's a great lesson to take away from that book. I see a question from David Elms. What's my sign? I'm an Aquarius, February 8th. I don't know what is rising. I don't know what is falling. Who could say? Who could say? I don't know. But that is it. I'm an Aquarius. I'm a water sign, and I think it means everything. You know, I think it really means everything, and it tells you everything you need to know about me. I'm a water bear. I'm creative, but I like conflict. Actually, I don't know if that's true. I don't know anything about star signs. A few things that I wanted to say, sort of finishing up, I guess, and then I'll answer any more questions that people have. So if you have any questions, please ask them now so I can see them come in, and they have a second to sort of filter through to me before I wrap up. But I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the imagery that recurs in the book. So the book takes place in London, which is where I live, and it takes place a lot. Elm says he knew I was an Aquarius. Well, there you go. I guess I'm a typical Aquarius. In the book, I got to draw a lot of like London locations that I liked, and the one thing that like I got to draw again and again and again is the kind of comedy venues that you see in London. Something that's really cool about comedy in London, and I perform a lot, is that so much of the comedy just takes place in like really random rooms above pubs. It's not like the comedy culture in any other city that I've lived in, and so I just got to draw like endless boring rooms above pubs, and there was something so weirdly fun and cathartic about that. I really, really loved doing it. The other people who especially the other comedians in the book are based off, who sort of generously let me make fun of their acts a little bit, have read it, and they have been very, very kind. And I feel really lucky, because when you make a nonfiction book, I mean, this isn't nonfiction, it's like highly fictionalized, but when you include any sniff of any real person, there is like a terror that you're going to completely offend them. Okay, I see another question from Son Not Sean. How did you get your first book published? So my first book is called How to Survive in the North, and it's a nonfiction book about Arctic explorers. And I got it published through an open submission. The publisher, Nobrow here in London, who published it, they just had open submissions on their website, and I submitted it through that. But I had been in contact with them briefly before at an industry day at the school that I went to, the Center for Cartoon Studies, and they suggested that I submit it, but I just submitted it through the open submissions, and then about 9 months later, I heard back. So I don't think it went to the top of the pile. But every book since then actually has been through me reaching out to people. So for this book, for the con artists, originally, I just cold emailed people basically and said, hi, I've done this book, would you like to publish it? And they said yes, which was really, really nice. Oh, I see another question from Molly Robertson. What comes first, the commission or the project? How do you get commissions? So for me, mostly the project comes first, and I work on a pitch packet, which usually includes, I don't know, like maybe 10 to 30 sample pages, plus an outline of the book, plus a bit about me and a bit about the sort of context that the book might fit into in the market, I guess, for lack of a better term. Other books, it's similar to that kind of thing. And then I just send it to publishers, and I've been extremely lucky that I'm working on my fifth book now, and I'm really, really, really grateful for that. Another question from David Helms: who's your favorite Beatle? Paul. Sorry to be, basic. Although his voice is too high and clear for me to do it karaoke, I can only do John. Denise Darrens writes, do you start a new draft every time you edit and save the old draft, or do your thumbnails solve this? So my thumbnails basically solve that. I see if I've got, okay, so this is a notebook that I have for my new book that I'm working on. And it's so poorly organized, actually, but I have the start of a draft here. And as you can see, this one's a little bit more neat because I used a ruler, but I have written it through. There's like some empty pages where I knew that I needed extra plot points to go in, but didn't have time to do them right then, or like I didn't really know what I wanted to fit in. But if I'm jumping ahead in the book, so here is, I get to some blank pages where I didn't know what to do. And then I was like, well, I'll jump to later in the notebook and pick up the book there. But I jumped like 500 pages and then start after that, and just leave like tons of them blank, I guess, just in case I want to do another draft in between. And so they're all like spaced out. But really, usually what I do when I want to make changes is I'll go through the pages and put post-it notes over them like this, or it'll probably be very hard to see on camera, but on this side, like lots of these are crossed out and just redone, or there's like arrows pointing the pages around being like, go over here, move that page back and forth, that kind of thing. Another question, how many pages do you submit to publishers when you pitch? It depends. I would say between 10 and 30. It depends on the project and how long it is. So for example, my third book, Americana, was 300 pages total. And so I wanted the pitch packet to be longer because it's a more slow-paced book. And I wanted them to understand more what it would be like to read the final book, because it was less snappy. It was more like a vibe. But for the con artists, I think I did 10 pages maybe, because it's only 160 pages long. So I think it depends how long the project is. I think you just want to do enough pages so that when somebody reads, in general, the rule for a pitch, I think, is that when somebody has finished reading your pitch, they should know exactly what it will be like to read the final book, because that is what you're trying to communicate. And so I just sort of play it by ear, basically. All right. Unless there are any more questions coming through, I think that about wraps it up for me. Oh, wait, I have one more question. Do you pitch before a project is finished? Yes, I do. Yeah, I usually don't even really start it. I might write a draft, but I don't really start it until the project is finished. So I think I'm going to wrap it up there. The Con Artists, which is the book that I've been talking about, is available now from Dun & Quarterly. It's available in any good bookshop. I encourage everybody to shop for their local bookshops, but of course it's also available online. It's really easy to find and order. If you just Google The Con Artists, Luke Healy, you'll be able to find it anywhere that you like to shop, but please support your local bookshops. Thanks so much for, oh wait, I'm getting loads of questions. No, let's go, let's do the questions. I want to do them. Listen, you took your time to be here and I'm going to take my time to answer them. Please, I've got nothing better to do. I've got a stand-up gig tonight, but it's new material, so I'm going to bomb. And so I'm eager to delay that as much as possible. I'm opening with a knock-knock joke. I think it's going to go really well. Let's see. Yeah, I'll wait for a second for some of those questions to come in to me. But what else would I like to say? Oh, there is a lot of stand-up in the book. So it is like, It's basically like my stand-up act from 2 years ago, just written down. I couldn't keep using it, after the pandemic because so much had changed, really. And this was during the pandemic when I was writing the book. So all of the stand-up that I had spent ages writing and then didn't have any place to perform it, I just wrote into this book, basically. And I think it's really funny. Sorry to pat myself on the back, but you know what? I did. I did my best. Okay, let's see, some questions coming in. Okay. Um, how do color decisions work? I love the palette in Americana and how it contrasts people from the landscape. That is from Artie Nappy. Okay, so, well, in Americana, I originally drew the book to be in black and white, and I really wanted it to have the vibe of like an airport paperback. Like I wanted it to be the kind of thing you could shove in your pocket. But I was asked by my publisher at the time if I could do a color version, and I decided I didn't want to redo the entire thing in color. It would have taken like a whole year. So I sent them a joke version where it was colored red, white, and blue because it's about America. But then they actually really liked it. And when they said that they liked it, I took a look at it again and said, well, actually, I really like this too. And so we ended up printing it in red, white, and blue. So which is sort of like a corny, I guess, but I think it actually looks really, really good. So I'm happy with it. Molly Robertson asks, do you still dream of mountain lions outside your tent? Loved Americana. Oh, thank you so much. That's the book that I was just talking about. So for anyone who hasn't read it, in Americana, I retell the story of hiking across the United States, which I did in 2016 by myself. And I was stalked by a mountain lion one night, and I had nightmares about it for like months afterwards. Actually, more than months, years. I would say that it's pretty rare now for me to have that dream, but every once in a while, I just had a dream the other night that I was in a tent that was slowly slipping off a cliff. So the camping dreams have not totally gone away, and I hope to get out and do some hiking and camping this summer. I'm going to be in Scotland. Okay, another question from Janine Lee. What jokes go best for you? Oh my gosh, I can't do material on this. It would be so bad. Like doing it in a silent room to a Zoom camera is just a way to make yourself look like a terrible comedian. But what jokes do go best for me in general? I think that there's something that I wrote in the book, but it is something that I heard many years ago, like 10 years ago on a podcast about joke writing. And I do apply it to my own stand-up writing, which is I ask 3 questions about a joke. Is it new? Is it true? Is it you? So is this something that is fresh? Is this something that is actually based in truth? The truth is almost always the funniest thing because it's hard to make up something that is more absurd than real life. And then is it you? Are you the only person who could communicate this joke to the world? Does it reflect your perspective on life? And those are the jokes that obey all of those tend to be the ones that work best for me. The knock knock joke I'm gonna open with is knock knock. Someone says who's there, and I just say Luke Healy, looking hurt because my name was just announced. Anyway, hilarious, right? It's gonna go really well tonight. All right, that's the last question on Instagram. Thanks so much again, everybody. Pick up The Con Artists in any bookshop you want, but please support your local independent bookshop. I hope you all enjoy reading it. Thank you so much and goodbye.